Hello, my name is Dawson Richard, and this is my second vlog for the Global Learners Project. In this vlog, I'm going to be talking about the interviews I had with the four panelists from our Global Ed panel. The four people I talked to were Adam Grimm, William Bork, Heather Reichmuth, and Carla Strickland. I got to talk to Adam Grimm first. Before he went to teach in Central China, he had no background in education, no knowledge of the Chinese education system, or even the ability to speak the language. What drove him to teaching internationally was his desire to work with people and the influence of one of his professors who was Chinese. For this process of getting his international teaching job, it required a lot of visa paperwork, but also what was important was having connections, and his connection was his professor. He felt that teaching internationally gave him a larger perspective on what it meant to learn about another place and the people, but it was challenging organizational-wise with living in another culture. His experience in the classroom structure was that it was very teacher-centered education, but very little involvement from the students. Because the classroom structure in China was different than what he had prior experienced, he had to be very deliberate in his use of the tools which he had learned. The class structure wasn't the only hindrance in trying to establish active learning. His boss did not understand why he would want to educate in this manner and didn't see the benefits that active learning could bring. He was to teach the way that he was normal for the traditional Chinese classroom. Because he was never taught in the States, he has a hard time comparing what it's like to teach in the two different systems of education. The next person I got to talk to was William Bork. He has very extensive experience teaching in not only the States, but also in Taiwan and Mexico. He has learned from his experience abroad that unlike the US, where you are taught to teach in a certain way, that when you're in a different country, you have to alter your teaching style with the changing culture so that it might work in one place, but it may not work in another. One of the benefits of his experience with other cultures for him was learning new things that he liked and disliked, broadening his perspective. This relates to when we learned in class about intercultural competence and sensitivity. His experience in the process of getting a teaching job abroad was once he was able to work abroad in Taiwan, many other doors opened for him and he had other offers to work overseas. He said it was difficult to leave the connections that he had made during his time teaching abroad. He noticed that it was easier to assimilate into some cultures rather than others based on the similarity with his own. A challenge of working in another country for him was the language barrier as well as learning how to teach cross-culturally. To overcome these barriers, he said you have to just learn on the job. And he noticed that the classroom structure is differentiated from culture to culture. As far as preparation goes for teaching in another culture, he felt that the basic tools that he learned were useful, but in most cases, the technical stuff he had learned had to be learned on site. Heather Reichmuth was the third person I got to talk to. She taught for 15 years in Korea. She had no prior knowledge of what it was like in Korea, nor did she speak the language. She was offered a job after she finished her schooling. She felt that her American-style teaching was desired by the school system, but it was not easy to get student involvement and change from their traditional style of learning. In order for her teaching style to be effective with her students, she had to work hard to gain their trust. It was very hard for her to adjust to the different style of classroom structure at first, but like a lot of things living in other cultures, it takes time to adjust. She had a hard time leaving the connections she made. She had a difficult time adjusting to the change in culture and communication once she came home. She felt she benefited from her experience of things she liked and disliked from the foreign culture. The basics from what she had learned during her schooling were useful, but she felt she learned most things from actually doing the job. The last person I talked to was Carla Strickland. Carla Strickland is from Trinidad, but because the offering of universities in the Caribbean was limited, she studied in the US. The connections she made abroad were very impactful, and the difference in teaching challenged her original ideology. She believes it is unreasonable to think that all students are the same, so you have to make sure that your instruction style works for your students. Tailoring teaching to what will benefits the students is crucial. In our class, we have talked about how the effectiveness of a teacher causes a massive positive effect on students. A challenge to teaching abroad was figuring out what works and what doesn't from the tools that she was taught. As far as cultural difference, the style of communication was difficult for her to adjust to, as well as the paying attention to cultural norms. From what I learned during this panel was that there were a lot of similarities between teaching in different cultures and what is required of you as an educator. Although most of the participants in this panel had no prior knowledge of the culture in which they were going to teach, many of them with time adjusted and were actually able to assimilate much of the culture in which that they were experiencing into their own culture. This is a very important topic that we've discussed in class because student culture is so detrimental to learning as well as what a teacher is required to bring into the classroom. I greatly enjoyed learning from these panelists and getting to talk to them, and thank you very much for listening.